Hey up and welcome to the Temple of Blair. This is part 2 of my conversation with Marcus Turner, former head of business affairs over at Roadrunner Records. On the European side, if you're unfamiliar with Marcus, check out part 1, and coupled with this conversation, you'll have the whole breadth of the story of Roadrunner Records from, say, 1990 from Marcus's point of view, which exposes many details of the Roadrunner story which would not be accessible through conventional methods. Anyway, thanks again to Marcus for sitting down and having these conversations with me. They're always awesome, they're always articulate, they're always incredibly entertaining for me, coming from the background I've come from. So enjoy it. 1, 2, fuck it up. So I listened back to our conversation the other week, and we focused quite a bit on the Universal acquisition, and kind of that's probably where this conversation is going to go. We're going to bring us to the end of that story arc. But since we had that conversation, I kind of like meditated on it a little bit more. And to me, the first domino falls with an album from 1992, which is Biohazard's Urban Discipline. Now, the story around that is they were a Warner band, but Warner and I don't know that this could be a little bit dicey in terms of details, so forgive me. The guys at Warner wanted some kind of low-level credibility, some underground credibility for this act before they put it on Warner. So what they did was they basically said to Roadrunner, hey, we've got this band called Biohazard, very New York centric, got like hardcore sensibilities and things like that, really innovative stuff. We want you to put out their first record, and then we'll take it, and it's ours. You have like a license deal, but not quite a license deal because Roadrunner's name is all over it. And then it goes out, it's great, fantastic. But in that transaction, there's a guy called Leo Cohen, who is part of Warner at that time. And for me, the first domino falls when he sees the operation that Roadrunner is, and that's when he starts his affair with it. And that carries us all the way through. That's the first seed, that's the first domino that falls when he sort of sees the what Case is doing. Does that have any merit? Does that make sense?
Was Lear at Warner at the time, or was he involved in management in some capacity? Because this is before my time. I know about the Biohazard deal. It was kind of like an incubator deal where Roadrunner indeed put out the first album, and Warner would. I thought it was Sony actually. You're right, it was Warner. Warner would then continue the success of the independent label, having launched this record, and take it to the
incubator deal. That's a great way of saying it.
Yeah, and well, Roadrunner was paid a royalty for the subsequent albums, so it wasn't a sort of meritless activity,
right?
But I'm not sure what Lear's role was in that capacity at the time. I just don't know. I could ask Case. That's why have you heard whether he was with Warner already, or was it in a?
I know he's in the blast zone of that deal. I feel like I can't remember where I got this from. I know he was there. Maybe it's a management capacity. Maybe it is in Warner. Maybe he was just outside looking in at the windows or something. But in my head, for some reason, that's where Leo starts his relationship with Case, and that's where this first meeting happens, or this first sort of handshake, which carries us through. Because when we look at the press around the Universal deal, a lot of the time you see either Case or someone in this sort of transaction saying, "Oh, we've wanted this to work for about 10 years, but it wasn't workable. We wanted some kind of arrangement whereby Roadrunner could be bought out by another company, or they'd have an investment in Roadrunner for 10 years, but it never worked out." So I feel like there's some kind of through line in there somewhere relating to Biohazard, Leo, and kicking off this entire process, which leads us to 2012. But if we don't know, we still don't know, and that's fine. That's
well, we could try and reconstruct that, but I mean, the name Lear for me didn't become sort of ubiquitous until that Universal deal. Then the name Lear was being thrown about all the time, and so the thread from Biohazard to the Universal acquisition or part acquisition is thin for me, and I didn't know I didn't know about that. But your reference to the deal having not being of maturity to that point. I can sort of place that as well, although I don't know. I just don't have enough information about the role or the relationship at the time.
Yeah.
Certainly, it becomes solidified in 2000, 2001.
Yeah, totally.
But the in between bit, I don't remember Case mentioning Lear that at all, for that matter. But that was all US business, and I was on the other side of the pond. So
yeah.
Yeah, I just don't have enough.
No, it's cool. I'm marking this as a observation / theory in sort of the canon of this sort of research vehicle that is a podcast. That's where I'm looking at the minute, because for plot point, I know I just describe this as almost in filming terms, and I don't mean to, but it kind of like it resonates really in terms of the story of Roadrunner. As a plot point, I feel like the genesis is over there somewhere. I feel like it. I could be full of shit, and I'm sure someone will tell me that the first time when Case met Leo will be something different. But that's where I'm looking right now. But as you say, so go on.
Even earlier than the Biohazard deal, you said it's like 92. I think even before that, 91. This might be even a question for Michel. There was one of the majors had an option to buy Roadrunner, and they paid a sizable amount of money to acquire the option to buy the label, which they didn't exercise. So there were some earlier flirtations with major label potential acquisitions than the year 2000, which is not such a strange thing, because the whole independent scene, certainly the larger independents, was interwoven with the majors. You have major label distribution, or you might have an independent releasing the album in Europe and a major would release it in the States, or vice versa. So it's certainly not a strange happening for Roadrunner to have been courting or courted by the majors even as early as the early 90s.
Wow.
And the Biohazard might certainly have been an example of that.
Yeah, a kind of more of a tangible manifestation of that appetite, perhaps.
Yeah.
Interesting.
You need it. I mean, the majors and the independents needed each other. Majors wanted to distribute independent labels, because that was a scene and a genre, as it were, that they weren't necessarily well represented in. And to be distributing an independent label would give them real sort of first-hand knowledge of how that label works, how the genre was working in a market. It would just give them the data that they would need to analyze whether an acquisition was later justified. Yeah,
and furthermore, in terms of the acts that come through that system, the indies are the bottle in which the lightning is captured. So I guess they want proximity to that. To allow further advantages and opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So let's talk about Leo anyway. Because he comes up a lot, especially as we approach the 21st century. But I feel like I'm characterizing him as like the vulture that flies over everything and then comes and picks at the carcass, when it's not really that. Cathay Reed Merritt said it the best way, which was Warner were just walking through the garden and they picked the best flower when they acquired Roadrunner. And obviously, when we have a character like Leo, who is unrepresented in this story, because all I do is talk about this guy that spearheaded the acquisition, I think a lot of details being left out. So I wanted to open the floor and just talk about this guy as a guy, so I can understand him a little bit more, if you're in a position to do so.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can certainly give my thoughts on Leo. Look, Case and Lear, if you put the two men beside each other, they're chalk and cheese. But I remember Case talking about Lear as being his kindred spirit, his soulmate, and vice versa. Certainly in an entrepreneurial sense in the music industry, they're both entrepreneurs ahead of their time in genres that didn't necessarily suit them. You could argue, certainly in terms of Case and heavy metal and extreme metal. And yet these men came together, and there was a spark and an amazing chemistry, and that relationship was so good and so positive and fruitful that it also dictated how the relationship of Roadrunner as a whole was to Universal as a whole, and I think that's something you wanted to zone in on as well. It was a fantastic working relationship. They let us continue to run the company as we'd done before, in spite of owning half of it at the time. So usually, if you come in and you own half a company, you want to have control. But no, they didn't. Universal left the control, or Island Def Jam in this case, left the control to Case, and that was very much, I believe, Lear having full and utter trust in Case to run the company in his way, and that would be with his people, and that would be the wherewithal to continue to be successful.
Yeah.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yeah,
totally. It's especially at that time when the trajectory was like, I'll quote Paolo, it was like, this is the tipping point. All we got to do is not fuck it up.
Yeah, and it was true. And I recall Lear was his larger than life, is a larger than life character and persona. And if you were, met him once at a get together in New York. The whole company was there, and the acquisition had recently been done. So Island Def Jam is now 50% owner of the company. The Roadrunner folks are sat there in this really crummy hotel somewhere in the Poconos, and enter Lear and his entourage by helicopter. I mean, how amazing is that? Talk about larger than life. This helicopter arrives on the lawn outside the hotel where we're all waiting for an audience with the Lear and his men, which is just an incredible thing for these like metalheads. Here arrives the super executive in his helicopter.
Wow, that's insane. That's insane, especially when you've been slumming it in the underground for so long. And then exactly. It's something to represent like the viability of like the Slipknot and Nickelback era. Have the chopper in with the big boys.
The chopper, and then I mean things were going so well at the time as well. I mean, Case used to be. I mean, it didn't happen often, but I recall him getting on a private jet with one of the executives at some point, flying back from a meeting in Canada. And then Case would go like, "Oh, I've just flown back by private jet to JFK." So there was some weird shit happening. I mean, it was just such a massive difference to what we'd been used to. We were the guys that used to come off of playing as, in the words of John Satley, as if your ass had been whacked by a sledgehammer for 12 hours, because we sat at the back of the plane. We never had business class. I mean, we were grunt class. There was none of that. And then all of a sudden we're part of the major label setup and reading their policies on business class travel. So we're going, oh, hang on, if you fly for 5 hours or more, you're eligible for a business class trip. Which I think, but even still, I think Case probably said, I don't give a shit what those policies say. We're continuing to do things as we used to, which kept it real for us and kept it sane.
Yeah. Need not want is how I'm running my budget.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree.
And we stayed lean. I mean, even though there was more money around and there was big successes with a few of the bands at the time. And I mean, I've alluded to the sort of like the 7, it's probably more lean years. It might have even been 10 lean years from about the 2001 onwards.
Yeah,
largely to the acquisition, final acquisition by Warner's. We were hugely profitable, and in spite of this crazy amount of money being earned in the company and turnover growing, the investments stayed largely in the bands, not in marble floors or pristine offices. The investment stayed in the bands and getting in the best personnel, best capital, and not squandering it on stupid stuff like business class travel.
Let's talk about some of the numbers then, because you refer to those years as kind of the glory years.
Yeah,
and I love this disparity. Maybe that's the wrong word, but if you ask Monty will say the 90s were the glory years, absolute glory years. And you're on another desk in the same company going, 2007 or roughly that were the glory years. So the Universal acquisition, 50%, I've read through it, 33 million. Does that sound about right?
50% acquisition. Yeah, roughly. Yeah.
Round about that. I think you mentioned something bottom line profit in those 7 years of about 20 million. Obviously, give and take whether Nickelback or Slipknot had an album out that year, presumably. But if we're looking at a base level of 20 million, this is pre-recession money. And this is in an era, this is a pre-Silicon Valley $13 billion deal industry. You know, it's we're in that sort of nice period where you could actually quantify what money means, what amounts actually mean certain amounts. Whereas now, when you see something like, oh, Disney acquire Fox for a total of something X billion, it's like, well, this now means nothing to me because it's a number that's staggeringly high. In real terms, a profit of 20 million per year is absolutely substantial for its time, and it's actually
that's crazy. I mean, it's crazy, for a heavy metal label.
Yeah, contextualizing that for a heavy metal label, that's absolutely insane.
Yeah, totally. I mean, a lot of companies would be happy with that kind of stuff to have a turnover of 20 million, let alone a profit of 20 million. I think we had a group turnover of maybe 100 to 150 million, and those numbers, you know, that profit percentage was fantastic. Also, it's not just the amount of profit, but the profit margin, which is so good, and the number crunchers were, you know, they were happy as Larry because those margins were so good. And you get that with the large volumes and the scale efficiencies and what have you. But I totally get Monty with the 90s being the glory years, because those were the years that those guys were building and the acts were getting better, and the successes were starting to grow. And relatively speaking, if you managed to chart a record in the 90s, it was a far greater success than doing it in 2005, when we'd had hit after hit after hit with Nickelback and others. And so, but I remember the 90s as being the lean years. We had a couple of years even before the arcade takeover that we've spoken about before, where we were canceling dinner appointments because we couldn't pick up the tab to pay the we couldn't afford the expenses, or we'd go out and we'd hope the other party would pick up the tab because money was too tight to mention. This is kind of like the European situation, and this is where the whole lean and mean ethic of ethos comes from. So when I talk about the glory years, I'm talking about those glorious, profitable years when we had no financial worries. Versus the 90s when we were still building.
There is an angle here from my side of the desk which pertains to why I think they were the glory years as well, and I think it's something to do with the A&R function. It's no longer fighting to be viable. It's taking a. So if we think of it like as a baseline, if we can try and quantify culture and say this is what the zeitgeist is doing. We've got the Black Album, we've got Nirvana, we've got these things. Roadrunner's always sort of like this. We've got thrash bands, we've got metal bands, we're doing the grunge thing, and it responds really well to what the market's asking for during this time. But as soon as we hit this period, the post-Universal acquisition years, all of a sudden we're trend setting. That transition to me is really compelling. And again, I could be full of shit, and I think it's all perception. And I think it's because that's when I was getting into metal. I consider those to be trend-setting years. Not that the years prior weren't, but I think it was way more prominent, and there was a lot more risk-taking in this period post-2000s. I think I need to crunch the numbers on that a little bit more, but that's how I feel those glory years manifesting. But yeah, I'll probably just open myself up to a torrent of abuse.
Well, no, what do you mean by, give me an example of what you see as trend setting versus what was just not making the grade as a trendsetter?
So for example, Grunge Truck.
Yeah.
That was a Seattle scene thing.
Yeah.
There was the rap bit that was happening in the late 2000s, late 90s as well, with Hard Boys and a couple of others. We'll go into that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how far we can down that rabbit hole we can go. Where else are we? In that late 90s era is kind of difficult to quantify because we have those flagships that are still doing the flagship thing, like the Fear Factories and the Machine Heads doing their thing. But I guess it's in the zeitgeist of metal, it's considered to be kind of a dark time as the 90s. And I find it difficult to reconcile exactly what trends were being set in this period. Early 90s, definitely, we've got Chaos AD, which is like the alternative to Big Four thrash. That's what Sepultura was doing. Fear Factory blending death metal and a more an industrial vibe. Typo doing Typo, which is like counterculture to counterculture. Great, these are trendsetters. You could even say they're outliers because nothing really came after them, which made you think, name another band like Typo. You just fucking can't. Name another band like Sepultura. You can't, especially in that era. It's kind of strange. But when we look to 2000s onwards, Trivium, Killswitch, this metalcore, this new wave American heavy metal, this is a totally fresh thing. It was spearheaded by Roadrunner bands.
Yeah.
Moving further forward into like Gojira, things like that, it's trend-setting. And even like Ron Berman's contribution with Blackstone Cherry, Airborne, this more contemporary, what we'd now call active rock. Yeah. I'm not seeing that where the thing is though, I'm tunnel vision. I'm thinking about Roadrunner. It could have happened elsewhere, but I'm just not seeing it. But the way I'm perceiving it is just like, it feels like there's a lot more risk taking, calculated risks, promising kind of like, it feels like there's a lot more control. Roadrunner knows exactly what it's bringing to the table, and it knows what trends it wants to set, and it knows where the market's going to go, and they're taking advantage of that. Again, spitballing as I go, but that's just the feeling I get at the minute.
I think you're probably right about some of that stuff. I mean, there was a period when we were doing a lot of sounds a lot like when we had a band called Shelter that sounded like Green Day, and we had Junkie XL sounded like Prodigy. So it's not like we were trying to mimic others, but we were certainly riding the wave of the grunt rock example. Is a good one as well, where we're trying to ride a wave that's already there to be taken, and it didn't really work out for us. So maybe that forced us back to let's go back to the core and doing what we do so well, namely putting out bands that are different and shaking things up rather than trying to be like others.
It's difficult because there's no hard rules here. There are plenty of exceptions to these rules, but it looks like the transition between the 80s, 90s into 2000s is the transition from reactory to proactory.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like. Again, theories that I'm get shot down for or explore further. But no, that's just my side of the table when we talk about those as the glory is for me. Obviously, as you say, there was an underlying profit and there was a viability there as a business, which we need to understand as an independent heavy metal label, I think hadn't done before. It hadn't happened before on that scale. And I keep saying things like this with nothing to back it up. So I need to look at it more. But I guess I'm just trying to throw ideas in the air and see which ones land with the person I'm speaking to. Because, rose tinted glasses as I'm looking back on that period.
Yeah.
Let's tidy a couple of things up. Last time you mentioned there's a SACE and a case. Where do we call SACE and where do we call case?
It's a funny one because he introduces himself in Holland as a SACE. His name is actually Cornelis, but there's a lot of Dutch who have names like Cornelis, Herbertus, there's sort of Latin-sounding names, Catholic-sounding names, which become something very different, almost like a nickname. So no one calls Case Cornelis, but so he has this. If he's in America, he introduces himself as Case because Sace is maybe an odd-sounding name. I don't know, but in Holland it's Sace. But then it's kind of left to the introduce to the person who he's introducing as to whether you continue to call him Sace or Case. He never corrects anyone. I've always called him Case. Wim, the CFO, calls him Case. I don't know what his wife calls him, whether I think it's Case, but others. So almost on a sort of arbitrary basis. Some call him Case, and some call him Sace. I think Case has sort of taken over a bit from Sace.
Yeah,
And I don't know. He will no doubt correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought Sayce might have come from Caesar. Case was a big fan of Julius Caesar's, and knows more about the Roman Empire than any Roman that ever lived in the empire. His knowledge of history is just unbelievable about pretty much every period over the last 2,000 or more years. Pick his brain at some point when you speak to him about history. His knowledge is just, it's gargantuan. So I thought that's purely my theory. I don't know. I don't know whether it's backed by any fact, but I think he's secret, well, not secret, but his admiration for Caesar might have been a reason to switch to seize. I don't know.
Maybe we should just like some things we should just leave to legend.
Yeah,
and I quite like that one. Cornelius, though. That's I never knew that, but I can speak to the case versus Sayce. A soft like sound. That would be kind of strange. We'd have to take a few extra steps to make that normal, and I see why, especially in the UK and the US.
It's funny because I mean, in Holland, the case is spelled in two ways, with a C or with a K. Obviously, if it's spelled with a K, there's no making it a soft C. I've not met any other cases in Holland who introduce themselves as Sayce. That's not to say that they're not around, but that makes him, I think, unique from also that point of view.
Yeah,
it's kind of like a label he gave himself.
Well, it's good to know there's no one answer, so no one's wrong and no one's right, and that's fine by me.
Yeah.
More housekeeping from the 90s. These are just things that I went through my notes from like the early parts of this project, and I was like, oh yeah, shit. I now know a load of people who can answer these fucking questions. Because at the start, it was just Googling until I could find something. Road Racer to Roadrunner. So the US title of the company. Obviously, there was when Case went to the US, Warner kicked off and said, someone might confuse your metal label with a flightless bird that we own a character of. Please rename yourself as Roadrunner or Road Racer for a few years, please. How did that get resolved? Because eventually records started getting released under the Roadrunner name again.
Yeah, look, that was a Case ultimately took advantage of the fact that Warner Bros. It wasn't the Warner Record Company, but Warner Bros. So the studio had not registered or not adequately registered the Roadrunner Meep trademark in Europe, but they had got really strong registrations and protection of that trademark in the States. So Case cunningly took advantage of this by saying, well, you guys haven't got a registered brand in Europe, or it's not registered in every country. You know what? I'm just going to take that space and be Roadrunner in Europe. And by the way, you guys can't operate your brand in Europe because I've already claimed it for records and other classes that you might want to at some point have protection for in relation to your own brand. So that at some stage brings the parties to the table because they need something from each other. Case wanted to have the name Roadrunner in the States, obviously. So they come to the table, and an agreement, a settlement agreement was negotiated that they would coexist. One could be a Roadrunner for records, but not records in the children's market. And there could be no reference to Meep or other, whatever bits and pieces from that cartoon. And at the same time, Warner Bros. Had to refrain from using their name and their brand and their Meep in relation to records for the adult rock market or whatever it was. So perfect cohabitation or coexistence rather of the marks worldwide. So that's what happened. And
so
that's
crazy.
That was the end of Road Racer. There was no longer a need for it.
Yeah, that's so. But in terms of, because it's always positioned as big bad Warner Bros. Coming in, and then the resolution is just left for speculation. But no one's talking about. No, Case just completely doubled down on the rest of the planet.
No, it was a really good one. But that whole trademark thing, we've had so much shit with trademarks over the past. I mean, I remember, when you register a trademark, we used to register all our band trade names because we were doing the merchandising as well.
Yeah.
So an example was Machine Head. was going out on that, and their emblem was going out on T-shirts. So I registered this name, Machine Head, in Europe, and within no time, I get an opposition from the trademark attorneys for the tennis racket brand Head. So it's like, guys, we do rock, heavy rock, and T-shirts of this band, and you make tennis rackets. Surely we're not going to be in each other's space. So that was happening all the time. But obviously the Roadrunner one was far more significant because it was a worldwide thing, and a bigger brand and a bigger problem, quite frankly, and it got resolved really well.
Love it.
We had a band in the UK called Wormhole at some point, and there was an American band called Wormhole. So in America we were called Wormhole, something really naff, like Wormhole US or something. You'd have to somehow come up with a distinguishing factor, and that was what Road Racer was. But it was a little bit too distinguishing because you couldn't really identify with the label on a worldwide on a worldwide basis if it was called two things in different places. Anyway,
yeah, it's good. I like that story though. That makes me happy.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, it's like kind of the David and Goliath battle, and that's what Case was so so resolute on. He didn't care about however small he was versus the behemoth of Warner Bros. Whatever, yeah, I'm right. And I'm taking advantage of this situation.
Something I forgot to mention last time, Blue Grape.
Yeah.
Its role in, well, first of all, where does the name Blue Grape come from?
Whoa, I just don't know.
That's fine.
That's fine. I have no idea.
That's cool. Its role in this Case's deal, which is now referred to as a 360 deal. The idea is, obviously, I know I go on about the deals a lot, but I want to focus a little bit on Blue Grape specifically from a merchandising front, because you mentioned that with your Machine Head anecdote. Roadrunner has a bit of publishing, a bit of the copyright, a bit of the masters, all this stuff. They have fingers in all pies, including merchandising. How significant is the merchandising to the bottom line? I mean, typically when I'm thinking of a band on tour, that's handled completely externally.
Yeah.
Surely the overheads don't justify the means on that, especially in certain contexts like touring. I know I'm speaking out of turn because I don't really know this world, but how critical was it? Was it really important that bands would also sign up to the merch company as well? Did that really keep the lights on anywhere?
I think it was maybe we were ahead of the game on the 360 thing, and later when the 360 thing became so important, we'd already divested Blue Grape. We'd sold the business probably about 5 years before 360 deals were being made in earnest. In the 90s, when I joined the company, it was almost like a dictate. You sign a record deal with us, you sign your publishing, and the office next door is your merchandising, go and sign that contract as well. The deals weren't sort of cross-collateralized. However, it was expected that you would sign the merchandising deal as well. At the same time, those bands needed a merchandiser. So it was a perfect solution for them to be able to go to the next office and sign a merchandising deal because they'd be getting T-shirts on tour. So it made perfect sense. It wasn't, it didn't always feel like sort of like a constrictor negotiation.
Yeah, totally.
So it made perfect sense to the band. To be honest, it's a business that record guys barely understood. It's that having to get T-shirts made in China and printed in Turkey, and problems with stocks or stuff going missing, the cash on tour. You can imagine there's a festival where you're selling, I don't know how many thousands of T-shirts and other bits and pieces, key rings, you name it. At the time, there were no pin machines. What do they call them? Direct debit machine. It was all just cash. And at some of these festivals and concerts, there was so much cash coming in at the same time at these kiosks that they were literally just throwing the money on the floor. Here's a T-shirt, give it tenner, we'll pick it up later. The merchandising folks would come to the office on a Monday after the Saturday gig or the Sunday afternoon festival with £200,000 in cash. I mean, that would put the fear of God into most people. Walking around with, imagine walking around with 200,000 quid in a little coffer, and then hoping that somehow tallies with all the t-shirts you sold, and then having the realization like, fuck, there's 1,000 t-shirts unaccounted for. And it wasn't untoward, or maybe it was. I mean, I don't think people were thieving magpies or anything, but stuff was just going so quickly that you couldn't account for everything. There were people at shows. You have to give complimentary t-shirts to the venue, to the band's manager. So there was just stuff being handed around all the time. So you couldn't make it tally. It was just a crazy business that we wanted to have, because it provided this unique offering to a band to be able to send pub records and merchandising, but it wasn't a business that we were a massive fan of. And the bottom line was certainly nowhere near as positive as it was with records. That's absolutely a given.
Maybe I should be reframing my perception of Blue Grape in this picture, because maybe it's got more of a marketing function than it does a revenue function, which all obviously rolls up into a revenue function. But yeah, if it's part of this whole, it's even part of this whole licensing thing I've got in my head. It's all about getting the brand and the fingerprint in someone's everyday life. Yeah, I'm not going to do that any better than having the stamp that prints the thing that's going into these territories. Maybe I need to look at it from that perspective. Or maybe I'll speak to Felix Sebastians at some point.
Yeah, that'd be great. I mean, and from that point of view, it made perfect sense. Also, it's a good point. But from a business point of view, and all the problems that that came to the surface, and the compromised bottom line, it was not an easy one. I mean, back to this thing of the stocks, you'd order 1,000 large, 1,000 extra large, 200 small, but then if a completely different demographic comes and buys the t-shirts, you're left with 800 extra large t-shirts with the name of the festival on it. What are you going to do with those? You're stuck with them.
They're good for 3 weeks and then it's outdated.
Precisely. So that was probably a reason not to get into merchandising.
Yeah. There's a lot of promo CDs that go out around Ozfest. Speaking of festivals and branding and things, a lot of them called Roadrunner owns Ozfest, and it's just because there were so many fucking Roadrunner bands on the Ozfest in the States. I can't, knowing what Sharon Osbourne's like in terms of like a shrewd business person, I didn't understand why they'd allow that. Yeah, Roadrunner literally coming in and going, "We'll just do the promo CDs and we'll put our name all over them, and don't you worry about it."
Yeah.
Let's move a little bit into this murky territory of the late 90s. Where there seems to be some flirtation with gangster rap and some very, very out there genres, which are very off brand for Roadrunner. And I have to say this a lot when we're trying to deal with this very genre and culturally agnostically, and we're trying to talk about Roadrunner as an entity which was a vehicle for disruption. I'm not shitting on Roadrunner for trying gangster rap. Why wouldn't you? But it's interesting how it seems they tried to penetrate that market. And I mentioned some bodies, which I can't tell whether they're subsidiaries of Roadrunner or they are just like imprints elsewhere, which Roadrunner worked with. This could be, it's more of a US based question, I think, but Power Records, Triad Records, Big Beat, there's basically a flirtation with that genre, and it seems to be quite tangible. It's not just a licensing arrangement. There seems to be joint ventures in there.
Yeah. Yeah, Big Beat doesn't ring a bell, to be honest. The other two do. I think if you'd ask Case, because I don't know the answer myself, I don't think we had an A&R guy that was doing gangster rap. If you'd ask Case, why'd you get into that? He'd probably say, I just wanted to do rap. I saw an opening, I saw a market, and someone turns up and they have a good product or a good idea, and we did a joint venture with them. But there were short-lived joint ventures, because I mean we talked last time a little bit about the arcade, the clash of cultures, and this would have, I think, represented a clash of cultures as well. So Power and Triad, I think it probably took longer to negotiate the deal than the joint venture actually lasted, because no sooner was the deal inked and it was almost over. and I couldn't name you one band from either one of those joint ventures. I'm sorry.
It's cool.
So I don't know. I think it was a flirtation with that the concept, but the marriage did not ensue.
It seems obvious. I mean, I'll give you the conclusion of that sort of like diatribe, right? So it seems obvious that it was a silly flirtation. It feels obvious, but Doc Coyle said this when I had him on the other week. We've got to remember that the music industry is only, like, even at that point, under 50 years old in any sort of conventional recognizable state. Of course, you try and take advantage of these opportunities. Only now, again, once we live in this sort of like, personalities are brands now. It's less of a product life cycle. It's more of a engagement relationship that keeps the money coming in from a revenue perspective, that it's easy to come back and go, wow, you signed a bunch of gangster rap. But yeah, I think it's an interesting product of its time, and especially with the Big Beat thing, given that Craig Coleman was the head there and he ended up coming in.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, Kay's tried other stuff. It wasn't only about, last time we talked about
Emergo,
the single with Cliff Richard. We had Moloko, which is a pop band. Even Junkie XL at the time was not really the core genre. It was that kind of like big beat sound that mimicked somewhat mimicked Prodigy. So there were a lot of flirtations with other music genres, and this was really in that sort of same vein. Just try something else. Yeah,
totally, absolutely. So we've alluded to the working relationship with Universal. How did that come to an end? Wally Van Mittendorp gave me a cracking story about how everyone went out for dinner, and Kay stood up and said, "I've got an announcement. This afternoon, I bought back Roadrunner Records from Universal." And everyone was like, woo, clinking glasses, monocles falling into champagne. And then he said, for about 5 seconds, when I turned around and signed it over to Warner. So what stopped? Why the transition? What was the Warner offering? Why did Universal not cut it anymore? Is this now Leo? Where are we?
Yeah, look, I mean, that's fascinating, actually, because we had the glory years, as I refer to them then, with Universal. Things were going great. The relationship was great. Universal had an option to buy the remaining 50% of the company. That option had to be exercised at a certain point in time. I don't know what year that was, but it'd be the year that the first part of the Warner was done. You probably had that information. Was it 2006, 7?
I think it was 2006 where they bought the initial 50.
Yeah. So it was
73.5 was the first amount.
Correct.
They went straight in with the majority.
Correct. Yeah. So this magic date comes up, before which Universal was supposed to exercise their option to buy the remainder of the company. Everybody within Roadrunner that knew this was going to happen had assumed, well, Universal is obviously going to buy the rest of the company because it's going so well. And we then get this notification saying Universal will not be exercising its right to acquire the remainder of the company. We're like, what?
This is like the year after. Christ, what's the Nickelback album? The one that went to like 10 times platinum, like the biggest.
It just did not make any sense at all. I mean, nobody understood it. It was completely out of the blue. It was like, I mean, the odds of that happening, as far as we were concerned, were less than 1%, but it happened. So, and we needed to replace the partner, because there were massive investment, even in spite of the profits, right? The profits were going to the shareholders. The company still needed to be financed.
Yeah.
And Case was looking to. He had a couple of options. He could have remained independent again, or gone back to independence, or you replace one major by another, and enter Lear again. Lear made the step from one major to the other. He moves to Warner, and it probably calls up Case and goes, "Okay, so this has happened. I'm moving, and let's stay married. Let's do the deal. We'll redo the deal at Warner, and there'll be it'll be a bigger share, but the deal has to happen soon." So we had something like a 30-day window to replace Universal with Warner, which is just a shorter period of time than
What's driving the 30-day period? Is that when the option would lapse? Something
like that. Yeah, we just wanted to be in sync, so there wasn't a long period in between when things were a bit fluid. or maybe it could also been from our point of view saying, okay, we'll do the deal with Warner, but we're used to these deals taking forever. We'll only do it with Warner if it's concluded within 30 days. I think that's more likely to have happened. Case going, yeah, Lear, let's do it, but I don't want to fuck around for 5 months. It's got to happen in 30 days. And then Lear was certainly able to push down to his people and say, this deal has to happen, 30 days, don't fuck it up. And it did. we ran around like headless chickens again for 30 days, and the deal happened. However, look, the advantage to a deal like that is that Case remained shareholder. So you don't get all these long discussions about guarantees, reps and warranties, and all the difficult stuff that you get in an acquisition when it's 100% sale. We were staying on as a shareholder, so you remain responsible for the business, and Case was staying on as the CEO as well. So the deal was relatively easy to be made. So one gets replaced by the other. It was where's Case's head at this point? Because he's 65. Is he thinking, close this out, let's start winding down? Case is now 81. He's still not thinking like that. Case will. I wouldn't be surprised if Case does acquisitions in the future. Once the entrepreneur, always the entrepreneur. He doesn't. I don't think he looks at life in terms of age. I mean, he's not the only one from that point of view. He goes on. He goes to work and he wants to do business. So he certainly wasn't thinking at that point anything like, well, let's start to think about my pensionable age. Far from it. This just gave him a new lease on life. He was driven again. The adrenaline was flowing through his veins again. There's another opportunity to grow the company with Lear, which was the big advantage to the Warner deal having happened. If Lear had not been sort of like the linking person, I wonder whether that Warner deal would have happened. But so it did. And with 73% or 74% of the company at the time, we still remained largely in charge of the company, not from a shareholder point of view, but from an operational point of view, which is unique. And again, that's Lear saying to Case, you do it the way you did before and the way you do best, and you keep your people and we won't touch it. You keep control, you keep financial control, because for anyone that's running a company, you need to have financial control of the company. You need to know what's going on, and not for somebody else to be running the books and telling you how the numbers work. You've got to have your own people doing that for you, and that's what stayed in place after the Warner acquisition of the 74%, which was brilliant. So for the next few years until the final acquisition, we stayed largely independent. So Warner left us alone as well until the remainder was sold, and then things did change. How did that change then? I think 2010 is when the remaining 26% was acquired. Then the paychecks start coming in without the red logo in it. It's got a different logo. Yeah, the temperature changed. You're now subject to the Warner policies on employment, policies on this, policies on that. We were having to fill in forms all the time. We were having to do questionnaires. Every month you get a questionnaire from HR. There'd be questions. We'd laugh at this. There'd be multiple choice questions. Is it okay to carry a firearm to work in any of the following events? 1, you feel under threat. B, you have a license. And we're looking at this going, the fuck is this stuff? We're now really under the Warner umbrella, having to do under all of their policies. And if you didn't complete these forms, you can imagine all these Roadrunner folks going, fuck these forms, we're not going to do that. Yeah. Fuck you, I won't do what you told me. And it would escalate to the head of HR in New York if one of the Roadrunner people hadn't completed the monthly questionnaire. It was fucked up. So the whole temperature is changing. And the head of the CFO is let go. Ian Flint is no longer with the company. We're losing financial grip of what's going on. Doug is one of the first people to go, isn't he? Doug is one of the first people to go in sort of the same time frame as Ian, and they were you know, the two bedrocks of the company, the pillars, the sort of financial and operational pillars of the company. So imagine Case now without those two guys. And there's Warner also now, they're 100% owned, like slowly moving in on the whole Roadrunner space and insisting that certain things happen. I mean, there'd be a dictate that there had to be an overhead cut of 10%. It didn't matter where it comes from, just slash 10% of the overhead. And that became really,
for a lean and mean company, that's a very difficult proposition.
Totally, yeah. And not much fun to be so-called running the company if that's how it has to be run. So it became a lot less attractive and palpable for anybody left in the company. It didn't take that long. It was 1 or 2 years before the big cull started, including yours truly.
So what was the catalyst then that made them think, all right, we need to buy this extra 26%? Because things were going well. What made them think, and this is pure speculation, I guess, what made them think we can do better?
What was the catalyst to buy the remaining 26% was, there might have been some sort of time frame related to the acquisition of the final bit, the final tranche. But also, I don't know, you might know this, but wasn't it Lear was leaving or going to be leaving at some point? The ownership of Warner had changed hands. That might have brought on a new tide of policies within the Warner Group about their subsidiary labels like Roadrunner.
In September 2012, Cohen resigned from Warner and started his own independent label, 300 Entertainment. So September 2012, April 2012 was when the axe is dropped, and what we're referring to as the Red Wedding.
Right. Yeah. And when did Bronfman sell to the Blavatnik, the Russian? That must have been around that time as well.
What's this? Sorry.
Bronfman was the owner of Warner. At the time, around that time, he sells at some point. There are a lot of changes around that time. Right.
Okay. I wasn't aware of this, so this is going to be another rabbit hole, another long evening.
Look at that. The Bronfman ownership of Warner's. It's an interesting period because he comes from he's a Seagram man, I believe, the distillery and other businesses, and he then becomes owner of this massive record label entertainment company, but he sells at some point. Yes. And the sale, I remember being around the time there were a lot of changes coming through for us guys.
Right.
And that was also almost in sync with Lear leaving the Warner fold. So that might explain some of the bigger changes. Just change of ownership, change of management, change of attitude towards the indie part of the company, as it were.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't think of that knock on it. I didn't think of that. I never considered the remaining acquisition of Roadrunner being the result of a knock-on effect over there.
Yeah.
And I should have done. That's interesting. That's very interesting.
Do you know what happened? This was after the acquisition of the remaining 26%, almost within days of that part of the deal closing. We were instructed to close the international office, so the office in Holland. We had to let 21 people go. So it felt like we'd been decapitated. That was sort of like the beating heart of the administration of the company.
Yeah.
That was when Ian and others were let go. The whole finance team was basically let go. They were given a long notice period, but it was the end game for those guys. That was when Wally was in his final part of his tenure, and that whole stronghold in Holland, that was the kind of like the spider in the web in terms of the relationship with the operating companies worldwide, was just gone, decapitated. And Case was left with 2 or 3. I think Wally actually stayed for a bit longer. Case and me, but it was not the same.
Yeah.
It's just not the same.
Yeah. So everyone's undergoing the stranglehold for this sort of 2-year period.
Yeah.
Shit flying in from all different directions, and I can empathize. Case has now lost control of his baby. So this is a very elongated period to be going under this kind of strain. He must have been ready to fly the nest quite early on in that process, right?
Yeah, fairly early on, because he signed a longer contract than he actually ended up serving. I think the intention, as is the case, as is often the case with these takeovers, you buy the remaining share of the company or 100% or whatever from the get-go, and you retain the executive for 3 years, 4 years. So I think it was probably one of those sort of long-term contracts that was entered into at the time, but it didn't last. Halfway in, both parties knew we're not gonna be able to sit out the whole term.
Yeah.
And a lot of that was Case just not enjoying running the company under these new protocols.
Yeah, under those new restrictions. So what was your personal experience of this then, as the clock's counting down to the Marcus departure?
Well, it's kind of a crazy period, because at the same time, Case was already starting to look at what he was going to be doing next. He had the C&R company still, so the Dutch record label and catalog. Yep. He was looking to invest in books. At the same time, he was subject to a non-compete with Warner, so he couldn't, flirt with the idea of starting another record label, even if he might have wanted to do that. But his sort of focus switches at that point to a media company in Holland that had a book division. Look, and last time we spoke as well, we talked about Case's love of reading books and that business.
Yeah.
So while I'm working for Warner in this sort of like sinking Roadrunner ship feeling, I'm also working for Case on the other side of the business, and this is an arrangement that Warner accepts.
Right.
Like a dual. It's like having a dual role.
Make billionist while we.
Yeah. But it was an understanding, but it wasn't a happy balance, because my Warner Roadrunner bosses were in America and London, so you'd be getting calls at 11 o'clock at night, pretty much every day, and while having done a day job for Case, who's like moving his new investment life forwards towards a new venture, which I found very exciting. And some of the other guys that had been let go before me had already signed new employment contracts with Case under the kind of like the new.
Was this Case's plan all along? Get the butterfly net, catch everyone, drag them into the new world.
Not catch everyone, but catch the ones that, because you couldn't finance everyone, much as he would love to have done that. His primary focus at that point was to acquire this book publishing business in Holland. So for that, he needed some of his key, mainly finance and operations people in Holland. So a handful, literally 3 or 4 people who are still with Case now, moved over and joined him in the new venture.
Right.
Yeah. So it's just a weird period in which you know what the outcome's going to be. I knew what the outcome was going to be. I was going to get a call at some point from HR in Warner HR in London saying, "Well, Marcus, look, time's up. Let's talk about how we settle this." So that was, waiting for the inevitable is never fun. However, at the same time, there was this net to land into in terms of Case's new venture, because he'd already said, "Look, when that thing ends, come with me in the new adventure."
Wow.
That's what happened.
Wow.
And now we are 10 years hence.
Yeah. That's everything that I wanted to explore. Those are the knowledge gaps I've got to plug.